Thank you to everyone for tuning in to our bonus edition of Bats in Churches Live. Today, we will be discussing the challenges of bats in churches and the solutions that the project is working towards. We will be hearing from Phil Parker, one of our highly skilled ecologists, whose knowledge on the topic goes far further back than the project itself. Sheila Lever from St. Pega's Church in Peakirk, who is going to tell us about their bat story. And our very own wonderful heritage advisor and keen church crawler, Rachel Arnold. I am the communications officer for the Bats in Churches project, Ione Fitzpatrick. So welcome everyone, and please do use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and the lovely Diana, an engagement officer on the Bats in Churches project, will be assisting with those and passing them on to me so we can come to them at the end if we have enough time. Many of you know the project inside out by this point, but for those of you that don't, the Bats in Churches project is a unique cross-pollination between Natural England, the Church of England, the Bat Conservation Trust, the Churches Conservation Trust, and Historic England that was created to address the issues that bats can cause in churches while continuing to protect their roosts. The project is working with over 100 churches and is running for 5 years in total. We are now in our second year, and it was made possible by a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So thank you to all you lottery players out there. England's bat populations have declined in recent decades, mainly due to habitat loss, and so are protected by law. Churches have become disproportionately important roosting sites for bats, all the more so because churchyards are often species-rich habitats filled with delicious insects that serve as food. Unlike in domestic dwellings where bats and people are separated by a ceiling, the open architecture of churches means that church communities can suffer from the presence of bat feces and urine when they're present in large numbers. This can cause damage to items of high historic and cultural value and reduce the use of the church due to the increased cleaning burden and smell. Not necessarily the perfume of choice for your wedding day. The project recognized that in order to contribute towards the long-term use of church buildings by their communities, visitors, and bats, practical support and workable solutions for the churches was needed. Solutions that are both physical and social to soften and complement the impact of bat protection legislation by protecting important church heritage and building sustainable community support networks. To afford our highly trained ecologists the freedom to trial novel bat mitigation measures, Natural England created a special license to allow new interventions to be developed with church architects and heritage experts, such as the creation of bespoke bat boxes that fit with the historic sensitivities of individual churches. The project is also bringing together church communities, bat and heritage enthusiasts, and local people to create a shared appreciation of historic places of worship and the bats that use them. Activities and events are running at project churches throughout the remaining 3.5 years of the project, once we're released from lockdown. And people can engage beyond that by surveying their local church for bats as part of the Bats in Churches study, which we hope to run this year as planned, but it's dependent on the changing guidance. So more details on getting involved in the survey can be found on our website. The project is also training and recruiting volunteers to create a national network able to support churches with bats around the country. The project also aims to develop the communication between bat, heritage, and church groups to help understand the issues involved and find collaborative solutions. We hope to leave a useful legacy after the project ends, so that support for churches and their bats continues. The new techniques used to separate people and sensitive items from the impacts of bats and the cleaning practices developed for valuable heritage items may be applicable to those caring for other types of historic building. So the findings from the project will be made widely available. In addition, the volunteer-led Bats in Churches study, which provides the opportunity to survey the Church of England's 16,000 churches, will provide critical data on the bat species present and their impact upon communities and historic buildings to aid future conservation decisions. Finally, we hope that the connections built between volunteers and professionals of different disciplines will continue long beyond the project, providing a robust network of support for churches. I am now going to pass you on to Phil, who will tell you a little bit more about the practical way the project is working.
Okay, is that okay?
That is great.
Brilliant, okay. Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to. Well, sorry, I just set my timer going. I get told off otherwise. Thanks for inviting me just to sort of tell you a little bit about why bats use churches and some of the mitigation options that we've been looking at as part of the project. I've been working with churches in Norfolk for about 10 years now, so that sort of predates the National Bats and Churches project. And as part of the Norfolk Bats and Churches project. Oops. Sorry, my thing's not moving.
You can also use the little arrows at the bottom left. If you hover over your picture of Norfolk Bats and Churches project, those arrows might work for you.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is based on knowledge we've gained from surveying 275 churches in Norfolk. And when I look at this map, I feel quite impressed that we're actually getting through many of the churches. But when we look at how many churches we've got left to survey in Norfolk, it's quite incredible. There's nearly 700 medieval churches, and this is one of the benefits of the national project, is it's going to allow us with a lot more resources to survey some of these churches we've never got to visit. As part of our surveys, we've recorded 8 species of bats using Norfolk's churches, and most churches have 2 or 3 species. Virtually all the churches we've looked at in Norfolk have got bats roosting, and our record was one at Great Hockham that had 7 separate species roosting in the church. So why do we think that churches are so important for bats? Now, one of the reasons could be loss of habitat. Here in Norfolk, we don't have lots of ancient woodlands where we do have old trees. They tend to be on big estates. And there is a big thrust in the moment for tidying up the countryside, removing trees that could be deemed as a health and safety hazard. And these are just the kind of features that bats would naturally be using for roosting, as well as many other creatures. In Norfolk, we've got lots of barns, and other parts of the country as well, that have been converted for holiday homes, and many of these might have been used by bats in the past. This is an image of Paston Barn on the east coast of Norfolk. It's a national nature reserve for bats, and the church is very close to the barn, so you get some movement of a proximity of bats between the two. And in Norfolk, we've got the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and they're encouraging us to manage churchyards more sensitively for wildlife, and this increases the amount of insects that are available for bats to feed. But I think probably the main reason is that churches are such important buildings in the landscape. They've been around for hundreds of years. Bats will always have known they're there, and probably generations of bats have used them. So within a church, where might bats roost? This is the medieval roof at Corston Church, north of Norwich, probably one of the most famous churches in the country. And to a bat, this is like an ancient woodland. There would be hundreds of open mortise and tenon joints, gaps and cavities where bats could roost. They can get either side of the roof, so the south side in the summer where it's nice and warm, cooler on the north side. And a bat could fulfill most of its requirements throughout the year just in a roof like that. This is a short video just showing some long-eared bats flying around a church. This is actually in Cambridgeshire, but you can see how they are using the space once they emerge from the roost to fly around, waiting for it to go dark enough to emerge. And these are often the times they're depositing droppings in the church. Other parts of churches where bats could roost, the wall tops, quite often gaps are enclosed, which are quite good for bats to roost in. And also behind wall posts. And here you've got a medieval wall post that's pulled away from the wall. And often when you look up, you'll see droppings on the wall indicating that bats are using it for roosting. Conversely, if you go into a church like this, heavily modified in the Victorian times, you may think that there's very, very few places for bats to roost, and you might be correct. Occasionally, the roof space has been enclosed here with a barrel vaulted roof, and it will enclose a void like a loft in your house at home. And quite often you'll get bats using these out of sight, out of sound of the people using the church. And this is just a short video of a cluster of long-eared bats in such a roof void in a church. We also get unusual places that bats might roost. And in this particular church, we knew bats were roosting, but we couldn't initially work out where until we found they were all roosting in the curtains over the doors. So you need to look in sort of unusual places sometimes. We've probably all heard the term bats in the belfry. Belfries tend not to be very good places for bats to roost. They can be cold, windy, and also quite light. But there are the odd exceptions, and in this church, the bats were roosting in this mortise joint in the bell frame. And we worry whether bats might be disturbed by noise and vibration. This particular church, the bells were rung every weekend, and the bats were quite happy to sit in the bell frame and breed. Below the bell chamber, there's often an area called the silence chamber with voids into the walls called putlog holes, and these can be quite good for hibernating bats. How do bats access a church? Most frequently, most parts of the country, it'd be over the door. And here you can see some droppings on the door, some staining at the top where the bats go in. This particular church here, it was quite obvious that the bats were going out at eaves level. Many droppings accumulated over a relatively short space of time. And in some churches, bats actually access through missing window panes, not necessarily panes that have been broken, but they may never have been there, left for ventilation. And there's a video of bats emerging from a window. This is Thornham Church on the Norfolk coast, one of the project churches. And they go out through that little diamond in the top right corner. 250 bats emerge every evening that way. So it's a bit of a log jam waiting for them to get out. And then we get really interesting things. So this is a long-eared roost that we couldn't work out initially how they were getting into the tower until we found every night 40 bats clambered up and down the bell ropes to get in. Fortunately, the bats don't weigh enough to ring the bells, which is sort of quite cool. Bats can also roost on the outside of a church. So here up under missing mortar on a ridge tile, or gaps by the side of rafters on the outside of the wall. And these features are probably more typical in churches in East Anglia, where the building stone flint is round and does leave these gaps. And sometimes bats will roost in holes in walls, like the one on the left-hand picture. The one on the right had a little owl nesting in it. So it's not just bats that use churches. And then sometimes you get really unusual things, sort of quite Dracula or Batman. And here we had bats roosting in this tomb. They were going in underneath the lid of the tomb. So over the years, we've tried to, before the national project, and the national project is helping us take this forwards now, we've been engaging with churches throughout Norfolk, holding things like bat nights. This particular church, we had 140 people attended. And able to engage with everyone with bat crafts and activities. It's not just the children that like doing this, but the adults as well. And one of the big successes of the evening, as well as watching the bats go out on infrared cameras, is to see bats live in the hand. And these events, apart from engaging with people, are tremendously successful at raising money. And I think our record on one evening was almost £900 to the church funds. So I say to the churches, you're putting up with the bats, actually make them work for you. And then just finally, a small case study about one of the project churches we're working on in Norfolk near King's Lynn. This is Gatenthorpe. It's one of the round tower churches, although you can see from this photograph the tower at Gatenthorpe is actually oval, which makes it unique. And several years ago, they had to re-roof the chancel. It was in a poor condition. And we, as a project, surveyed the church, and we found out that there was a roost of common pipistrelles in the church, about 70 peak numbers, and they were accessing through this gap in the gable wall near the tower. So as part of the repair works, that gable had to be rebuilt, and a slot was installed so the bats could sort of re-access the church. But we took the opportunity at the time to see if we could encourage the bats to use the church in a different way. So we installed a bat box into the eaves, and the bats had to walk past the box to get into the church every night. So the hope was that they would abandon the inside of the church and start to roost in the bat box. And at the same time, we also included a bat slot up on the ridge of the nave as another place that bats could use. And it's been incredibly successful in a way that we've now got bats using the bat box, although they're soprano pipistrelles, which were never in the church in the first place. So these are sort of new bats that have moved in. And I went to the church last night and had over 320 soprano pipistrelles out of the box, which is our record count. Oops. And this is just a very quick video taken inside when the box first went in. So you've got the soprano pipistrelles coming out of the box and the bats flying around with the common pipistrelles in the church, all using the same access. And so at the moment, the soprano pipistrelles are roosting in the area where the green circle is. The common pipistrelles are roosting in the area where the red circle is. And we've now only got 1 or 2 bats using the inside of the church. So we've applied for a license as part of the project. So the plan is, and this would have actually taken place apart from the COVID lockdown, to build an enhanced box over the entrance to exclude the remaining bats from inside the church. But also that's the sort of red exclusion. Also the blue lines are boards that will allow us to remove sections of where the roost is to be able to clear it out every year so we don't get a buildup of droppings and smell. And that was just sort of like a little case study of a church where things have moved on quite rapidly. The church are extremely happy. We think this is now the second biggest church bat roost in Norfolk. They would like to hold the record, so it's sort of been a win-win. We've increased the number of bats, but made the church actually much more habitable for the people that are using it. That was the end.
I'm on mute. Thank you so much for that, Phil. That was really interesting. Okay. It's great to see the videos and the little bats clambering around.
Yes, it's nice the videos worked okay.
Yes, it was really nice.
Bandwidth,
and
so.
The bats roosting in the curtains just really blows my mind. So I'm going to now pass over to Sheila, who's going to talk to us about her experience with St. Pega's Church and all the drama that happened there with their bat story.
Hello everyone, I'm Sheila Lever. I'm a church warden, one of 2 at St. Pega's Church in Pega, which is situated 6 miles northwest of Heathrow in the county of Cambridgeshire. St. Pega's is an 11th century church, a Grade 1 listed building, and it's dedicated to St. Pega.
You just need to press on the top left again. I don't think it went through the first time. Yeah. Brilliant. There, you've got it.
I've got it, yes. St. Pega is the sister of Guthlac, who was based in Crowland. and a daughter of a noble family of the Midland Kingdom of Mercia. It's a small church. We've got 30 people on the electoral roll, 5 benefice, a benefice with 5 churches, 1 rector and 3 lay readers, another one in training. The church has early 14th century wall paintings above the nave and the north aisle. They're outstanding, but they're in need of restoration. Paintings include the Passion of Christ, the Gossip, St. Christopher, and the 3 living and the 3 dead. There's a large maternity roost of pipistrelle bats in the chancel, and this corner here is where they come and go. They usually fly around the churchyard at twilight. I didn't mention, there's also long-eared bats, brown long-eared bats in the north aisle, and they fly around the churchyard at twilight, at the surrounding gardens before going to feed at Deeping Lakes, or so we're told. They usually arrive in April and leave in September. Over the years, the church has had tremendous problems with bat droppings, both staining the woodwork and on the wall paintings. Before each service, we have to lift all the coverings and sweep up and check the pews. It got so bad year on year that we contacted Natural England. They suggested a bat volunteer come and visit. Anthony Mould came, he gave us a talk on bats, and then we had a bat count. And he's been coming ever since just to keep an eye on them. Our bats are also mentioned in the thesis, so they're quite well monitored over time. Anthony suggested that we put a plank of wood over the back of the reredos to stop all the droppings falling on the altar. This we did, and they did help for a while, but every harvest, when the lady came to arrange her flowers, she had to start by cleaning up, and normally filled just over half a bucket. The church had great plans for reordering. We formed a project group, and they were taking all the plans forward. But unfortunately, we had a setback and were devastated in November when all the lead was stolen. Well, not quite all. It was stolen from the whole of the nave, most of the chancel. They left a strip over the bat roost, which we thought was very kind of them, and most of the north aisle, and here they left a strip, which we thought that the brown long-eared bats were roosting in. But they left the south aisle and south porch, which we're a bit disappointed with because they were in a very bad state of repair, and according to our last quinquennial report, needed replacing. However, the theft was discovered during the Sunday morning service when we looked up and could see daylight through the rafters. I, as church warden, then contacted the police, who came with a drone, took photos and looked for evidence. The builder came the next day, and I'll just show you some photos here of the stolen lead. There we go. And the builder came and put a temporary roof covering all over to protect the inside of the church, especially the wall paintings. The architect came to measure up to see how much it's going to cost to replace, and the loss adjuster came from the insurance company, and he was very efficient. By January 2019, we received the full amount of our compensation. I know it's a case of closing the door after the horses bolted, but we then decided we'd have an alarm. We contacted security companies, as did the remainder of the churches in the benefice. One had had lead stolen 2 weeks before us, and the following week the thief had come back, or thieves, but had been unsuccessful. We applied for a grant from All Churches Trust and were successful, and in January 2019, the alarm was installed, so we did feel happier. We then had various meetings with Historic England, our builder, the architect, and Historic England then placed us on the Buildings at Risk register. because of the wall paintings and the lack of roof. They suggested we contacted Toby Curtis for a survey, which we did. He came in January 2019 and gave us a favourable report to say there was hardly any change since he last came in 2017. Historic England agreed we could replace with turn-coated steel all round, which was wonderful because it's more or less half the price and less susceptible to theft. We also had agreement from Natural England to go ahead as long as it was in the window of September 2019 to April 2020. So the project group placed all plans on hold and concentrated on replacing the roof. The architect prepared the statement of need, everything in March 19, went out to tender, we went to the diocese and all our paperwork. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the go-ahead and the public notice until August, but that's another story. In May 2019, we discovered we had to apply to Natural England for a bat licence because we were replacing the whole of the roofs and not just the stolen lead. Luckily, this is where Bats in Churches came in and gave us tremendous help and support. We registered with Bats in Churches in 2016 and they visited the church and they were very sorry to hear about the loss of lead and contacted us to ask was there anything they could do to help. So we explained about the bat licence. They immediately employed Matt Cook as the bat consultant to undertake obtaining a licence for us. He had to do at least 3 surveys of the bats and complete a questionnaire, 80 questions. Luckily, he did most of them. I just filled in bits for the church. But after the 3rd survey, he decided that we had to replace the roof with lead. So it was a bit of a disappointment and we were rather shattered, but Bats in Churches came back when they heard and said, don't worry, we'll pay the difference, it's because of the bats. So we were very grateful that they were paying all his fees for doing this. And phase 1 started in it was beginning of October 2019. And Matt had devised a plan because of all the droppings in church to put a bat box in the chancel. So he'd worked with our architect and the builder and he was there when phase 1 started at the beginning of October. They took back the remaining strip of lead over the bat roof and discovered there were 7 bats still living there. So Matt rescued them, put them in little bags, and the other church warden released them into the bat box in the evening. Bats in Churches provided us with a banner. It arrived a little late for phase 1, so it was only up for a couple of weeks. So we then put it on the church gates, as you can see. But phase 2, we displayed it on the scaffolding again. We had lots of problems here, which I won't go into. The bad weather, the terrific high winds and rain, delaminated coping stones, rotten roof timbers, discovery of asbestos. It just seemed something every week was discovered. But finally, the end of April, the whole project was complete. We've got wonderful new roofs. I'll show you a couple of them to pass on to future generations. But we have a very depleted bank account. I'd like to thank everyone who helped and supported me. I wasn't expecting this when I became a church warden, especially Bats in Churches who were there at every problem we had, giving lots of suggestions and solutions and financial help. All that remains now is to clean the church inside and out when it's safe to do so and have a big celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Sheila. It's really interesting to hear the different stories because every church has its own, goes through its own journey really, like, and with the bats and everything, it just sounds like you went through so much, so you must be absolutely relieved to have that behind you now. We'll definitely be there for the celebration. We're looking forward to it very much. I just can't wait till we're out of lockdown and we can get going on all these fun events. So all that is left is now Rachel. So I'll pass you over to Rachel, who just says ask to unmute. So hopefully you'll be able to do that.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Great, excellent. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you, Ione, and thank you to the other two speakers as well. It's been really fascinating seeing how important churches are for bats, and also some of the success stories of a couple of different project churches. But there is no denying the massive impact that bats have in some of our churches. The damage and disruption that they cause has made some of our church buildings completely unusable. The church community is depressed and despondent, and significant historic fabric at risk. While working on this project, I have seen some of the most extreme examples of what can happen when bats fly freely inside a church. Perhaps our most shocking example is St. Lawrence in Radstone. This church was struggling with few volunteers to clean, and with droppings becoming greater and greater in number, they closed the church. By the time the Bats in Churches project got on site and took these photographs, the church had been closed for around 3 years with no cleaning being done at all. What you are seeing here is just huge amounts of droppings, dust and other debris weighing down sheets of plastic that had been put out to protect the church furnishings. Splitting all the way across to Cornwall now, this is St. Moran in Le Moran on the Roseland Peninsula. It's a beautiful church and a really beautiful location, but another one that closed due to a number of contributing factors, including bats. They closed to the public with no knowledge of when they might be able to reopen again. And All Hallows Dean in Bedfordshire is another church that closed their doors because they could not cope. This time they were only closed a few months rather than years, but still the buildup of droppings is quite significant. Now, the plight of the parish church is a major problem and too deep to go into now, but amongst reduced funding, fewer worshippers, services, lead theft, vandalism, and eye-wateringly expensive repairs, bats are often the final straw in the survival of a remote church. And even where churches remain a thriving focal point of the local community, they have had to change their use of the building and adapt around the presence of bats. This is Holy Trinity Church in Lincolnshire, or in Tattershall. Tattershall have to be one of the most innovative churches on the project and have worked around their situation with great success. They have a strong PCC and a team of volunteers who keep on top of the cleaning. When you enter the church, you see a series of gazebos and sort of like deflector boards or shelvings and other temporary structures put up to protect the interior from the bats. Tattershall also have the most amazing array of monumental brasses, which are covered by sort of, it's in the left-hand image, sort of low tables, I guess, to protect them from the bat droppings and urine. Salford Church, on the other hand, have erected a large plastic sheet between the chancel and the nave, separating the bats from the people. Now, these are not the best images that well, they're the only ones that I had, but they're not the greatest. I hope you can see what's going on in them. The bats are using the nave while the people and the congregation use the chancel for their services. The rest of the fabric in the nave is covered in plastic sheeting as well. So why all this covering? What actual physical damage does the droppings do? Now, bat droppings are dry and crumbly and mainly made up of exoskeletons of insects that the bats eat. They are relatively harmless on their own, but small amounts of fats and oils are present that can stain surfaces, especially if they are damp. Bat urine is chemically aggressive and etches and bleaches all kinds of surfaces. It soaks into porous materials like stone or wood and sits on the surface of non-porous materials like metals, causing lasting chemical alterations. So here are some brasses on the right-hand side, some stonework. Brass and other metalwork, tiles, stone, marble, alabaster, glass and plaster, and anything else that you can think of, are all affected by bat droppings in urine. Now, I'd really like to go into detail about every single material in the churches and how they are affected and what we can do to try and protect them or change that damage that has been done. But we can't, well, I don't have time for that today in only 10 minutes, and we hope to cover all of that in the future. I will, however, look at one material in particular. Oh, these are some wall paintings, not wall paintings, wood. Now, in general, wood is stained by bat urine, and all these little white spots that you can see are bleached out areas where droplets of urine have sat on the surface of the wood. There is a slight difference between wood with no coating, waxed wood, or varnished wood. Unwaxed wood stains, but it's slightly less obvious. Where the droplets have sat on the surface, it spreads a little as it's absorbed into the wood. Over time, the appearance appears slightly more blended. If you can make it out, the middle image has a waxed pew shelf, bench shelf, and beneath that is the floor, which is unwaxed. And as you can sort of see, the waxed area is much more defined spots of urine. So waxed wood can be potentially more resistant to the urine. White blooms develop within the wax coating, but do not always leach through to the original wood itself. This means that where this has happened, buffing this wax or re-waxing may have a really positive effect and improve the visual aesthetic of the product. But this is not guaranteed and should if the wood is very historic, significant, or non-waxed. Shellac or varnish surfaces react slightly differently again, and the varnish may blister due to the ingress of urine. It can then detach and flake off. A similar story can be said of other items with surface decoration, like painted items, wall paintings, or encaustic tiles, for example. In older medieval wood, like this, any new change in its appearance pales in insignificance next to the patchwork of its multi-layered history. Hundreds of years of history, the surface of this wood is clearly very ancient. So removing droppings and urine as quickly as possible from the surface of wooden items is key to prevent their saturation into the surface. Although unsightly, do consider covering areas of your church that are worst affected. For all materials, the best thing to be done with the church is to remove the droppings as soon as possible. Sweep and dust on a regular basis, pay attention to where accumulations build up, and lay out sheets to catch the droppings. We also need to think about protective measures. There are a few out there, some nicer ones as part of this project, and along with the other mitigation work that the other two presenters have talked about, we are looking into these too. Although this is not ideal, prevention is definitely better than the cure, as the damage can be lasting and is very expensive to correct. So here's an example on the right, is West Grinstead Church, and the church community there have created a shroud over their impressive Risebrack monument. Although it's really visible in this image, but in real life, I guarantee you it blends in quite well and is really very sympathetic to the monument. It effectively catches droppings and can easily be removed and cleaned. I just want to finish by briefly saying what the outcome was or is likely to be for those poor churches that I talked about at the beginning. So at all of them, we have hired or are in the process of hiring ecologists like Phil to carry out surveys and come up with inventive mitigation strategies. And these are all still under development. So Radstone has had its survey. It's been thoroughly cleaned by its designated ecologist, Chris Damond, and has plans for mitigation, which involve reinstating a ceiling to house the bats in. Lamoran has had its bat surveys and they are planning repairs to their ceiling. The bats already roost within the ceiling and will have plenty of space to roost and fly around once the gaps have been sealed and slight extensions have been made. All Hallows Dean has since been cleaned by a team of local volunteers with a bit of support from the Bats in Churches project. It managed to reopen for Christmas services, which was wonderful. They were due to have bat surveys this year, but unfortunately due to time lost with the lockdown, they will have to be postponed until next year. Although this is disappointing, all around I think the church feels more able to cope with their situation, for now at least, with the support from the project and the future promise of potential mitigation and surveys being done next year. To conclude, I just want to say that there is hope. Keeping on top of cleaning is absolutely key to the survival of the church. For more information and advice, keep an eye on the Bats in Churches website. We've just put up a little bit of guidance around cleaning post-lockdown, so look out for that. Or get in touch directly. You can always drop me an email and I will help in any way I can. I had so much stuff that I could have gone through today. I could have talked for an hour, but I had to quite rein it in. The Bats in Churches project is still quite in the early days of the project, so although we have not managed to give very definite answers to some of the really big questions and issues we are working on, mitigation strategies and protective measures for churches will be key outcomes over the next few years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. It's quite shocking to see some of those images, it really is, but if nothing else, it does show that, you know, solutions need to be found for many of these places. And it does actually, well, it certainly gives me hope that in some of the churches already we've seen really positive outcomes, like at St. Pega's, and we'll be able to see how well that worked after a couple of years of monitoring. We do have time for some questions. So thank you all of you that have given questions in. I'll just see, we've had one which talks about it might be I'm gonna actually, sorry, let me just, I think it might be one for Phil, but it was a question that talks about cleaning out the bat boxes. Obviously you're very involved with putting the bat boxes in, and I know some people worry about the accumulation of droppings in the bat boxes. Who do you think, what is the best way to deal with that, and who would be responsible for cleaning them out? Presumably it's sort of case by case basis, but I don't know what you've come across before.
Certainly with the churches we've worked with in Norfolk, for example, Gate and Thorpe, we've put provision for the bat boxes to be able to be cleared out. Obviously it's not satisfactory for droppings just to accumulate over years on the wall tops and never be able to, you know, get to them. And certainly to date, I've been going, and I think most of the, you know, it's a sort of kind of job volunteers would actually, I won't say enjoy doing, but you know, it's quite satisfying when you do clear out the droppings, and it makes very good fertilizer as well. So but yeah, I think every church is going to be different, but I think it's sort of working with bat volunteers and bat groups and things like that. I know in Norfolk, the Norwich Bat Group are quite keen to get involved with churches in their area. So
definitely, as Sheila mentioned, for St. Pega's, getting in touch with their local bat worker really helped them. So that's a really key point, I think. Get in touch with the bat group.
It is one of the objects of the project, isn't it? Is sort of long-lasting relationships between churches, and you know, once the project is finished, you know, we don't want it just to walk away. So it's these long-lasting relationships are quite important.
Yeah, definitely.
There's also a question that kind of follows on from that about whether volunteers, cleaners, anyone who's doing the cleaning should wear protective clothing. Rachel, is that mentioned in your guidance document at all?
Yeah, there's a bit about it in the guidance document. I suppose, although the bat droppings and the urine themselves, it's not damaging to our health, it's not bad for us in any way, but large, like like those churches that I showed you, the large accumulations of droppings can get quite dusty, and there's also a chance that mold spores might grow in them. So it's quite important that you wear a mask while dusting things like that, and also gloves if you can. I know at the moment, like, gloves and masks are impossible to get hold of, but yeah, just to protect against dust and that side of things getting into your lungs. Perfect,
thank you. And the guidance document can actually be found on our website for anyone who's worried about what the church is going to look like when they return after lockdown. There's it's in the church communities section on our resources pages. Sheila, I have a question for you here, which is, I suppose, about the journey of your perspective and the community's perspective on the bats. Have you seen there's been a change from the beginning when you were feeling a bit desperate about it, and then afterwards, now that you've been able to address it?
It's very difficult to tell because of lockdown. We can't go into the church. So really, we don't know what the situation is, whether bats are using the bat box the whole time. We won't know until after lockdown when we've been in. I have been in to check as part of the insurance cover, and there have been little droppings, but whether they've come down since or before, we just don't know. So I'll be able to report back on that when we get into the church and we give it a good clean and sort out.
Definitely. Well, there are on our website, there's also a page for each church. So we'll be able to update that when we have more, when we know the kind of final chapter, as it were. Hopefully the final chapter, nothing else comes up for you, Sheila, on the St. Pega's Church, and we'll keep that updated.
Thank you.
So there's a couple more questions here. There's a question on another one for Phil here, which is, why can't bats just use natural sites like trees? Why aren't there, what's going on? Why do they have to use buildings?
Bats would naturally use trees as a roost. I mean, if you went back a few thousand years, there weren't buildings, there weren't man-made features that they could use. So we think it's a lot down to changes in habitat. I mean, if you think about how much habitat there would have been originally for bats to use, certainly in Norfolk, we don't have a lot of old trees left. We have
should get Phil back in a second. Had a bit of a pause.
That can support bat roosts. So there's a whole list of reasons why we think certainly churches in East Anglia, and particularly Norfolk, have much more bat use than other parts of the country. As I said earlier, I mean, we think 99% of Norfolk churches have got bats roosting in them.
Gosh.
So a lot is down to how the environment's changed, but also just the stability of the building. You know, if you think of houses, they're having repair works carried out all the time. Lots of bats naturally would roost in fairly modern houses. That's where most of the big bat roosts are. Houses built in the 60s and the 70s, where they got wooden soffits, fascia boards, cladding. That's all been replaced with plastic. Bats can't get in. So this is why they're turning to sort of these more stable buildings in the local landscape.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting to see how that's changed. We have a question about registering your local church, because there was a question at the beginning actually about why the distribution of churches. I don't know if you can answer this one, Rachel, but the distribution of churches was more focused on the Norfolk area. I suppose it's just really to say, do you want to take that? Or?
Within the Bats in Churches project?
Yeah.
So Phil put up a really, really good geographical map, didn't you? But Phil's got a separate, like another additional project, I guess, working specifically in Norfolk. Our Bats in Churches project does have quite a heavy East Anglian focus, but we do have a few spread out around the south as well. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot that we're missing in the north, and I suppose a little bit towards the west as well. The current project team wasn't around in the development phase, so we're not 100% sure about why that is. But we would love to hear from anybody who wants to get involved. Although we can take on new churches, we could do training events or other events further out at other churches, and that would be really wonderful. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. We did have another question. Another question about registering churches, and we at the beginning we were actually able to take on a couple more churches, which was great. But now we are really working at full capacity. The team's flat out. But the more we can do events like this, and we can and Rachel's making her cleaning guidance and things like that. We just really hope to offer as much as we can in terms of resources, and please do get in touch if you have any questions about your local church, and we'll try and offer advice where we can and invite you to any training or anything that might be helpful, and advise on any grants and things like that could help you out. And yes, so I think we have time for one or two more questions. We've got one here that says, with Phil's case study in mind, would you recommend that any church with bats roosting inside consider installing the bespoke bat boxes near entry points when there are roof works planned? So I suppose, like with Sheila's situation, is that a kind of fits-all solution to put in the mitigation when there's roof works planned, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
I would suggest that if it's a church that does have issues with bats internally, and obviously you'll need to take account of those bats when any repair works are carried out. But I always encourage the churches to, at the time they're doing roof works, to investigate building in bat roosting provision on the outside of the church, perhaps not necessarily as Gayton thought was in the eaves, just because it was relatively easy to do it there, but on other churches we've built bat boxes on the outside under the rafters and things like that, and it's a lot easier to do it when you've already got scaffolding up doing repair works than having to do it as a sort of separate project. So it's always worthwhile investigating what you can do. Even just putting bat boxes up in trees in the churchyard in some instances sort of can help. So always be open to anything that you could do, really.
Go ahead, Sheila. Do you have something to add?
Yes, we have actually tried bat boxes. We had them before Matt came, one in the churchyard. The reason we wanted to try and stop the bat droppings is part of our reordering was the wall painting. And obviously we didn't want to spend thousands on the wall paintings and then they got covered in bat droppings as the bat population was increasing. So that was the reason, we said, please do something before we do the restoration of the wall painting.
That was a sensible decision, I think. There's another one for you, Sheila, actually. It says, please could you talk about obtaining a bat license, or how long did it take? Was it very expensive, and was it essential in your case?
It was essential in our case because we were replacing the whole of the roofing. We included the south porch and south aisle because it was cheaper to do so at the same time. But we only got agreement to replace the lead that was stolen. I don't know how much it costs because Bats and Churches very kindly paid all the costs for that. And because we were very short on time, it was May and we were wanting the work to start late September, it was rushed through. Matt worked very hard. So I'm not sure. It does take several weeks. Maybe Phil can explain how long it takes. I'm not sure. But ours had to be really rushed through to meet the deadline.
Yeah, the license takes up to 6 weeks from when it's submitted to when it would be granted. Although I think at the moment they have been working a little bit more quickly than that. Often what can take more time is sort of getting the right faculties and permissions through from the church. Yeah, that can take an awful lot longer than 6 weeks. And
it's a bit of a dance, isn't it?
it is, and with the bat mitigation, it's sort of obviously you've got windows when you can actually carry it out, and we're talking about, in most instances here, about large maternity roosts. So you would be looking to undertake your mitigation between beginning of October and the end of March, but you also have to take into account that you might have bats hibernating as well. So there's quite a lot. Every church is completely different, and there's quite a lot of factors that need to be taken into account.
Definitely, it is. Every church is completely different, and that has been a very interesting thing to learn about when we've been on the project. Just to go to all these different churches and experience what they're like, and in every single one, the church is different, the bats are different, and they require different solution completely. That is, I'm afraid, all we've got time for. I know there are lots more questions that we haven't got around to answering, so we'll try and answer some of those on Twitter later. Or alternatively, you can get in touch with us through the website. We've got a contact form on there, so if you do have a burning question, please do ask away. The last thing to say is thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of our speakers over the whole series, because this is the end, unfortunately, which is very tragic, but we do hope to be back. So we would also love to hear from you if you could send any ideas for topics for our next live series, which hopefully we'll be able to do in a couple of months. And thank you to everyone for your feedback. And when you leave this session, you'll see there's a SurveyMonkey link. If you could fill out that form, that would be amazing, because the feedback which we've received so far has been heartwarming, to say the least, and also really useful. So we want to make the next series as good as possible, so we need your help to do that. So it's bye from Bats in Churches for a little bit, and goodbye from all of us here.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.